Ora bem, hoje temos o YouTube muito mais ativo que a Twitch, não sei o que é que está a passar. Ok, what really happened to Jeffrey Epstein? Bora.
How does the country's most notorious prisoner, locked inside a high-security facility, just die? Jeffrey Epstein was meant to be under constant watch, guards on duty, cameras rolling, routine checks. Yet he was discovered lifeless in his cell. The system failed, protocols collapsed, and the world was left in shock. What followed was an avalanche of theories, investigations, and suspicions that refused to go away. On today's episode of the Infographic Show, we break down the Jeffrey Epstein case
É provável,
day by day. July 6th, 2019, Jeffrey Epstein returns from a trip to Paris, disembarking at the Teterboro Airport in New Jersey. The police are waiting. This isn't Epstein's first brush with the law. He served time in Florida on sexual offenses in the early 2000s, but most legal analysts say he got a sweetheart deal. Since then, he's cemented his position as one of the most powerful figures in both finance and politics. He's held hundreds of meetings with high-powered individuals, many on his private island in the Caribbean. And despite his deeply checkered past, he remains a regular fixture at New York high society parties. But he won't be making any more social hours. The size of the arrest team makes one thing clear: this is no minor case. Federal agents move in, place him under arrest, and transfer him to the Metropolitan Correctional Center in New York City. Upon his arrival, an employee noted that he appeared confused, sad, and withdrawn. She recommended that the staff keep a close watch on him to ensure his safety, but the prison's psychological team was reportedly never contacted. Instead, Epstein was processed into the federal system like any other inmate. But it wasn't to last. July 7th. Epstein only spent 22 hours in the general population. News of his arrest exploded, fueling spiraling rumors that this was the big one. The feds had finally nailed him. Staff at the MCC knew that he was the most high-profile inmate in the facility at the time, so the decision was made to transfer him to the special housing unit. This decision was driven by intense media coverage and concerns for his safety. Officials not only wanted to shield him from other inmates, but also knew it was essential that he made it to trial and possibly expose the other criminals he worked with. And just one day later, this theory would be proven true. July 8th, Epstein was brought to court for his initial hearing, where the federal government unleashed a raft of charges against him, led by sex trafficking. He pleaded not guilty at his initial hearing and was held on remand at the MCC pending further legal developments. The charges echoed those he faced back in 2008, but this time they were far more thorough. Given the penalties, a conviction would almost certainly ensure he spent the rest of his life in prison, as he was nearing 70. And that was the kind of thing that could turn a man desperate. July 9th. Normally, an inmate with charges this serious would get a psych evaluation, a check to see if he might hurt himself. If flagged, he'd be locked down under tight watch with almost nothing in his cell. However, Epstein slipped through the net. The prison psychological staff only urged caution. This allowed him to be kept on psychological observation and out of the general population for his own safety, but without the extra security that might have kept him safe, because it would be a long wait to trial. July 10th.
Mano, como é que conseguem? Conseguem porque, obviamente, tu tens alguma coisa que os impede de dizer a verdade, percebes? E isto, no caso da Pam Bondi, nota-se claramente.
Epstein met with the prison's chief psychologist for a routine check. The log showed he was eating, sleeping, and even talking with other inmates. Epstein wasn't happy about being stuck in the SHU and asked if he could get a single cell. He was taught some coping strategies and continued to deny he was a threat to himself. The psychologist declared him stable and ordered him back to the SHU, this time with a cellmate. July 16th. Epstein met with the chief psychologist again, this time during a meeting with his lawyers. He continued to deny having any psychological issues. The psychologist's report found no concerns or any need for a follow-up session. He noted that Epstein would be monitored only through routine SHU rounds and monthly reviews. July 18th. Epstein and his legal team appeared before the judge for a second time for a bail hearing. Epstein's team attempted to present their client as a low-risk inmate and a pillar of the community who could be released safely on bail.
Há duas hipóteses aqui prováveis, que é o gajo, forjaram a morte do gajo, o gajo andava a passear na boa, ou então o gajo era tão influente que tiveram que lhe limpar o cepo para o gajo não se chibar daquilo que estava a passar.
They even proposed an arrangement where Epstein would wear an ankle monitor and be confined to his $56 million New York townhouse. But the judge ordered Epstein held in prison, citing his massive flight risk given his 20 international trips in the past year and his access to private planes. Epstein's legal team vowed to appeal, but for the moment he was heading back to his cell at MCC. And it wouldn't be long before he was in the news again. July 23rd. At 1:27 in the morning, guards were alerted to a commotion in Jeffrey Epstein's cell. The inmate was found sprawled on the floor of his cell, dazed and half conscious. A strip of cloth was wrapped tight around his neck, the skin beneath already bruised. It wasn't serious enough to require hospitalization, but he was transferred to the psychological unit, where he was observed 24 hours a day to ensure he wasn't a danger to himself. But not everyone thought this was what it appeared to be. Epstein's roommate at the time was Nicholas Tartaglione, a notorious murder and drug trafficking suspect whose charges meant he would never be getting out. Tartaglione denied having any involvement in Epstein's injuries, and prison officials cleared him of involvement, but not everyone accepted that conclusion. Spencer Coven, an attorney representing several of Epstein's victims, argued it might have been a deliberate attack, an attempt to silence Epstein before he could strike a plea deal. And this was when the case really started gaining momentum in the American mind.
Pode ter havido aqui deal entre o gajo e o outro que era para o porem numa cela sozinho.
Nothing official has ever surfaced about Epstein's black book of crimes, but everyone knew he moved in powerful circles and probably kept receipts. And so the idea of an Epstein list caught fire, the alleged roster of names and deeds tied to his private island, and plenty of people were convinced the powerful would do anything to keep it buried. July 24th. Jeffrey Epstein is transferred to his new quarters, a rude awakening even for his current situation. The observation cell for high-risk inmates consists of windows on all sides, 24/7 lighting, and every possible risk stripped away. He stayed there until July 30th by his own request, enduring round after round of psychological exams. Then officials sent him back to the special housing unit to resume his regular jailhouse stay. So how did people take their eye off the ball for a second time? July 31st. Another court hearing would take place.
Mas isto foi tudo no espaço de porra de mês, mano. Fogo.
With the judge being briefed on all the events that happened since. It was estimated that the trial would take 4 to 6 weeks, but no formal date was set. For Epstein, it was another crushing setback, who was given yet another psychological check after marshals noted he appeared distressed on his return from court. But after a formal assessment, it was determined that it was safe to return him to his usual routine. It was the calm before the storm. August 8th. The next few weeks would pass relatively quietly, with Epstein under close watch, but a note would later surface, written during this period, in which he bitterly described his cell conditions. He claimed bugs crawled over him at night, guards left him naked in a shower for an hour, and one officer, Tova Noel, deliberately served him burnt food. These accusations were never fully confirmed or debunked, but it was one incident that should have raised more red flags. Epstein arranged a jailhouse meeting with 2 of his attorneys and signed his last will and testament. He named 2 long-term employees as his executors and placed his holdings in a trust. It was a massive alert as to what was coming next. But everyone missed it, and it wouldn't be the only time. August 9th. Epstein's routine at the prison had settled down, and few people were worried about his safety anymore, at least on the surface. The previous day, he had bought around $74 worth of items at the prison commissary, including a radio and headphones. This was seen as an indication that he was adapting to prison life, and security might be lessened soon. However, it was unlikely that he would ever be transferred to general population, due to the threat of violence from other inmates who knew about his crimes. But things happened fast from there. On the morning of the 9th, the largest information dump on the Epstein case was released to the public. Over 2,000 pages of documents related to the current accusations against him. They were seen as highly damning and ensured that even if he was somehow able to avoid conviction, his reputation would never recover. That day, Epstein's cellmate was shipped out in a scheduled transfer. By policy, he was supposed to get a new one, yet none was assigned. That night, he met with his attorneys, who said he looked upbeat. It's never been confirmed how much he knew about the document drop earlier in the day, but it is likely his lawyers informed him. But we still don't have any explanations for what happened that night. The MCC was a tightly regulated facility, housing numerous violent and high-profile inmates. Epstein was supposed to be checked every 30 minutes, a routine meant to ensure his safety. After his attorney meeting, Epstein was walked back to his cell at 6:45 p.m. by Officer Tova Noel.
Tova Noel é a mesma que lhe deu burnt food.
Same guard he'd once accused of singling him out. And that is where things start to get weird. At 7 p.m., Epstein was permitted an unmonitored phone call, normally forbidden under Bureau of Prisons policy, but allowed by the unit manager. Records listed the call as going to his mother's number, but that wasn't the case. In reality, he was talking to someone else, someone close to him. When it ended, Epstein walked back to his cell, a cell he now occupied alone. That night, Noelle and her partner were on duty to run the standard inmate checks. Both had spotless records until now. Cameras caught them skipping the 4 p.m. and 10 p.m. counts. At 10:30, Noelle strode past Epstein's door but never looked inside. The cell count was submitted and approved based on the falsified information, and the lockdown for the night began. It wouldn't be the only strange thing to happen that night. The guards were required to check every 30 minutes, but from midnight until 6:30 a.m., Noelle and her new partner Michael Thomas never entered the cells. Cameras caught them sitting at their desk, sleeping and browsing online.
Oh, meu
The
Deus.
paperwork told a different story. During this time, they signed multiple false count slips, indicating they had checked the cells repeatedly. Hallway cameras showed no one ever stepped into Epstein's cell. The cover-up might have never been discovered if investigators hadn't later reviewed the footage. And soon, their job failure would become worldwide news. August 10th. It was 6:30 at the MCC.
Tudo no espaço de um mês, malta, literalmente. Foi 9 de julho ele foi preso, 10 de agosto.
Distributing breakfast, but one inmate was missing. The morning shift guards arrived at Epstein's cell and found him in a near-seated position, a strip of bed sheet tied around his neck and fixed to the top bunk. He was unresponsive, already in cardiac arrest. The guards immediately hauled him down and began performing CPR, reportedly yelling at the criminal to breathe. But Epstein was gone. He had been dead for almost 2 hours. The supervisor was notified, and Epstein was transported quickly to the nearby hospital, where he was officially pronounced dead. But even this was an unusual violation of protocol. A death like this requires the cell to be treated like a crime scene. Epstein's body should have been examined on site by crime scene investigators, with evidence preserved and photographs taken. But less than 10 minutes after the body was discovered, the crime scene had been heavily disrupted and much of the evidence had been destroyed. And the mysteries would only deepen from there. One of the first things the investigators did was check out the security footage, but all 3 cameras covering Epstein's cell had failed. 2 produced no video at all, and the third recorded only damaged, unusable images. The MCC was an aging prison with outdated equipment, but for the highest profile inmate in custody, the simultaneous failure of every camera was staggering. Noelle soon confessed to her supervisor that she and her partner had failed to perform any of the cell checks and falsified the slips. This was an unusual incident for a guard with a mostly clean record. It wasn't clear if it was a deeply unfortunate time to shirk job responsibilities or something much more sinister. As word of Epstein's death leaks out of the prison, it didn't take long before conspiracies started to emerge, and many people thought it wasn't Epstein's hands around the bedsheet. And some of them have good evidence. This was the first death of this sort at the MCC in 21 years, and forensic pathologist Michael Baden quickly raised concerns with the official story. He pointed out that Epstein's size made the method improbable, that sturdier materials like his sleep apnea wires were ignored, and that even small items on the bunk appear untouched. This would potentially indicate that the crime scene was staged, and Epstein was strangled by someone who entered the cell. After all, he had plenty of enemies. On one hand, the official story made sense. Epstein was an older man, used to wealth and privilege, and it had all been stripped away. He was possibly going to spend the rest of his life in prisons, forced to either be mostly in isolation or to be in the general population where he would be a massive target. But others argued that he could have been targeted by people who wanted to ensure his knowledge of past clients never got out. They could have easily paid a struggling prison employee to look the other way. Sooner or later, the evidence would come out.
Acho que estas duas hipóteses são muito
fortes. Sent by Epstein's lawyer to observe the initial autopsy conducted by Chief Medical Examiner Barbara Sampson. The evidence proved that the body was consistent with a self-inflicted death by hanging, although Epstein's team disputed the findings, suing for more access to the camera footage near his cell. They argued that the evidence pointed to murder, and this theory soon gained traction in the media. That meant more and more attention was turned to those who had past dealings with Epstein, and soon there would be hell to pay for those who fell down on the job. August 13th. The first head to fall wasn't one of the names directly responsible, but the boss. Attorney General Bill Barr announced an investigation into the MCC's failings and suspended Warden Lamine Ndiaye, replacing him with James Petrucci from the Otisville Penitentiary. 2 staff members on duty that night were also placed on leave, but unlike the warden, their absence was widely expected to be permanent. There was much more to come, but first business had to be taken care of. September 5th. Jeffrey Epstein was laid to rest in Palm Beach, Florida. His body had been claimed after the autopsy by an unknown associate, who would later turn out to be his brother Mark, who ran a real estate business.
Isso é sempre bocado ambíguo, né? Tipo, sabes que isso é sempre cenas que são bocado... sei lá, no Reddit. Qual é a credibilidade disso, percebes?
Ever been associated with his brother's crimes. While Mark deliberately kept a low profile, he stated in a few interviews that he believed the circumstances were suspicious. The case was so high profile and tensions were so high that the family chose to have the markers removed from their parents' tombs to avoid vandalism. But the fallout was just beginning. November 19th. The criminal trial was about to begin, but not against Epstein. All charges had been dropped after his death. Ghislaine Maxwell hadn't even been charged yet. But the case against Tova Noel and Michael Thomas was much easier to put together. The two were charged with multiple counts of falsifying records and associated conspiracy. And there was plenty of evidence. They claimed that they were being scapegoated for larger issues in the prison system, and at that point, they would have been the only people to go to jail in the Epstein case. But the system showed mercy with the two taking a deferred
prosecution. Imagina que os guardas prisionais eram os únicos a ter sido presos na cena dos Epstein Files, bro. Isso era wild.
And being allowed to go home. But another key figure wouldn't be so lucky. December 2019, Nick Tartaglione had his own trial to worry about. But the criminal was also a suspect in the first incident that nearly left Epstein dead. Details of the July 23rd incident came up in court. But the defense claimed that he had actually tried to save Epstein's life. It was a bold claim, and they wanted to present the footage in court. But when they attempted to play it, the government claimed it had disappeared. Judge Kenneth Garris ordered the government to find answers, but they came back and claimed that it had been deleted because of a clerical error. Another case of missing information related to Epstein. But the mystery would keep growing. Epstein was gone, but his secrets weren't. The evidence he left behind was about to take others down. On July 2nd, 2020, Ghislaine Maxwell was indicted. Sex trafficking, conspiracy, charges heavy enough to put her away for life. After years of hearings, she got 20 years. And she wasn't the only one. That same year, Epstein's associate, Jean-Luc Brunel, was charged by French prosecutors with sex crimes later. But like Epstein, he never made it to trial. His death in custody was, to many, all too familiar. But one case wouldn't stop anytime soon. The FBI and Justice Department opened their investigation into Epstein's death the same day the warden was reassigned. But no smoking gun ever surfaced. The inquiry outlasted Trump's presidency, continued under Biden, and concluded with Attorney General Merrick Garland. On June 27, 2023, the Justice Department released its report. It cataloged dozens of failures, negligence, incompetence, and misconduct, but ultimately found no evidence of foul play. And for most people, that answer wasn't good enough. As of 2025, Maxwell remains the only person convicted in connection with the case, though she has since been transferred to a lower security facility after reportedly cooperating with authorities. Most of the files are still sealed, many part of the ongoing criminal investigations, and no client has ever been charged. Which means that however or whoever ended Jeffrey Epstein's life, many of his secrets died with him. Jeffrey Epstein's mysterious death raised more questions than answers. And that's not the only case buried in government files. Watch 50 declassified FBI secrets to see what agencies don't want you to know. Or click on this video instead.
É aqui neste canal do YouTube que a gente vai saber. Não pá, mas giro. Este canal é bacana, por acaso. Never stop talking about this. Por acaso, esta cena. Sim, senhor.